In my last video, we discussed the world's first empire and how it was able to last over 100 years by maintaining a professional army and by establishing an effective bureaucracy. And now in this video, we'll expand our horizon to the Aegean Sea, where I'll establish the westernmost expression of these ancient Near East civilizations. And of course, I'm talking about the area we know today as Greece. But back then in the 23rd century BCE, it may or may not have been occupied by people that could be considered culturally Greek. Let's start by looking at the English term Greek. It's helpful to know that we get that term from the Latin word, which I know I'll mispronounce, Graecus, and that term originally refers to a single tribe. The word then expanded to mean several groups of people that shared a similar culture, even though back then all these tribes or city-states never united under a single nation. And they never called themselves Greeks. Rather, they referred to themselves as Hellenes, but that term only first appears in the 6th century BCE. Before that, in the 8th century BCE, when their writing started to flourish, Homer refers to these people by a variety of names, such as the Achaeans and the Danaans, but never Hellenes. And before Homer, there were two more civilizations that dominated this area in the 2nd millennium BCE. And even though we don't know what they call themselves, we call those civilizations the Mycenaeans and the Minoans. Yeah, so I mispronounced Mycenaeans all throughout this video. When I was filming, I kept saying Mycenaeans, but in post-production, I realized the rest of the world apparently says Mycenaeans. I don't know if it's a tomato-tomato sort of thing, or if I'm just wrong. Let me know in the comments. The Mycenaeans did speak an early form of the Greek language and therefore are considered to be Greek. As for the Minoans, we don't know what language they spoke, but we do know they interacted with and were displaced by the Mycenaeans. We do have some Minoan writing, which scholars call Linear A, but it hasn't been deciphered yet. So were the Minoans culturally Greek? Well, again, maybe, maybe not. It does seem, however, that scholars like to lump them into early Greek history for 3 reasons. 1, its location in an area that's been historically Greek. 2, its culture mixed with the Mycenaeans, and as we know, the Mycenaeans are considered to be culturally Greek. And 3, Homer's writings, aka the Iliad and the Odyssey. Now, I do want to discuss Homer's influence here, but before I do that, let's take a closer look at the Greek timeline to help orient ourselves. As you can see, people occupied this area for thousands of years, even before this timeline, leading up to the Minoan civilization, establishing the necessary foundations for civilization. It's also important to note the migration of Indo-European speaking people into this area, because it's this language family that will eventually dominate Western culture. And it started with the Greek language being captured in ancient scripts like the Mycenaean Linear B script, the Cypriotic script, and the Phoenician script. And of course, the Greek adopted Phoenician script would eventually evolve into the modern Western scripts that we use today. And I've already posted a video on the evolution of the alphabet, so go check it out if you want to dive a little bit deeper. Now, in the centuries leading up to the Minoan civilization, there was a distinct island culture across the Aegean Sea, which scholars call the Cycladic culture. But the greatest island culture to emerge was, of course, the Minoans, and they are known for their huge palaces on the island of Crete. Now, when dating this palatial society, 2 of my sources say it was established by around 2200 BCE, indicating that it was developing during the 23rd century BCE, which made it easy to place it in that century for this project. But as I begin to corroborate this date with other sources, other scholars place it later, some even as late as 1900 BCE. So just know that my dating for this event is on the early end of the dating spectrum. And if you've been following along watching my other videos, you already know that that's just the way it goes when dating ancient events. Next, we have the Mycenaeans replacing the Minoans. Then we have the Greek Dark Age, and this is when Greek civilization collapsed and their old writing system, Linear B script, was discarded. Then somehow the Greeks rebuilt and repurposed the Phoenician script for their writing, and we entered the Archaic and Classical Greek ages that begins with the writings of Homer and ends with the death of Alexander the Great. So when people are thinking of the foundations of Western civilization in literature, history, democracy, and philosophy, they're most likely thinking of these last 2 periods. So that's the timeline of ancient Greece in a nutshell, and I wanted to outline it first because it's helpful to be aware of it when understanding why we call Minoans Minoan. Since roughly 750 BCE, there has been an unbroken chain of intelligible writing and culture constantly building upon itself. The Romans revered these Greek writings, medieval monks and scholars revealed Roman writing, and the scholars of the Renaissance and Enlightenment sought to preserve and discover everything they could, and their goals have persisted into modern times. It wasn't until the excavations and the decipherments of ancient texts in the late 19th and 20th centuries, like hieroglyphs, Sumerian, and Greek Linear B, that we were able to reconnect and understand the writings that predate the Archaic Age. So with all that in mind, when scholars went digging around in Greece looking for evidence of civilizations that predate this Archaic Age, they had romantic ideas of what they might find, placed there by the earliest known writings from that area. And of course, I'm talking about Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And in 1899 CE, when Sir Arthur Evans read about a large civilization on Crete ruled by King Minos in Homer's Odyssey, he went to Crete, started digging, and he found a lost civilization. And even though he unearthed it, he never discovered what they called themselves. So he decided to call it the Minoan civilization, named after King Minos of Crete. It's sort of a placeholder, of course, until we discover what they actually did call themselves. But as of today, we still don't know. So we still call it the Minoan civilization. And if you're not familiar with King Minos, here's his myth in a nutshell. A long time ago, on an island far, far away, a man named Minos wished to be king of that island, Crete. In order to prove that he was divinely chosen by the gods to rule, he asked Poseidon to send him a magnificent bull to sacrifice. Poseidon granted Minos' wish, the bull instantly walked onto the shore, and the people of Crete elevated Minos to king. Minos, however, was so impressed by this divine bull that he decided to sacrifice a lesser bull in its place. Poseidon was not happy with that, so he cursed Minos' wife, Pasiphae, to fall in lust with the bull. And yada yada yada, she ended up giving birth to a child that had the body of a man and the head of a bull. She named him Asteris or Asterius, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, but everyone else knew him as the Minotaur. Shamed by this grotesque creation, King Minos wanted to keep it hidden from everyone, so he had Daedalus build him a prison called the Labyrinth, with many winding passages to keep the Minotaur from escaping. And Minos would feed it by throwing young Athenian men and women into the labyrinth. Then Theseus, the great hero of Athens, decided to take the place of one of the soon-to-be sacrificed young men, and he killed the Minotaur. Unaware that King Minos' daughter gave Theseus a thread, or clue, to find his way out of the labyrinth, King Minos blamed the builder of the labyrinth, Daedalus, for the escape of Theseus. And yes, that is actually where we get the words clue and labyrinth. So Minos imprisoned both Daedalus and his son Icarus. Daedalus then built some wings so they could escape, and they both flew into the sky and away from Crete. Icarus, not listening to his father, flew too high and therefore too close to the sun, and the sun melted the glue on his wings, the wings fell apart, and Icarus plummeted down and was swallowed by the sea. King Minos would eventually find Daedalus in Sicily, but King Minos was killed upon trying to seize him. So there's a lot of great stuff in that myth. Not only is it where we get the words for labyrinth and clue, and of course the phrase flew too close to the sun, but there are probably parts of that story that are glimpses into the actual history of the Minoan civilization. Take the Minotaur, for instance. Now, of course, no scholar believes that there was ever a creature that was half man and half bull, but the bull does seem to be a dominant subject in the art of this ancient civilization. And no labyrinth was ever found, but huge storage rooms were found under the palaces. At the largest palace in Knossos, they found hundreds of gigantic jars that held 240,000 gallons of olive oil and wine in those huge storage rooms. And Theseus was probably not a real, larger-than-life Athenian hero who precipitated the events that would lead to the death of King Minos, but the Minoans were eventually replaced by the mainland Greeks, which scholars call the Mycenaeans, and that mainland civilization would have included Athens as part of their territory. So you take that all together and it's easy to see a plausible way how this myth evolved. First, the Minoans were displaced by the Mycenaeans. Then wild tales came back to the mainland of bulls and huge underground rooms that twisted and turned that would slowly evolve into the myth of the Minotaur and the Labyrinth. And of course, the Athenian hero who helped slay the beast and bring down the evil King Minos and his civilization would be from the mainland where this new seat of power was. Of course, I don't know if any of this is true, but I can understand how Sir Arthur Evans, upon unearthing this lost civilization and knowing Minos' story like the back of his hand, could easily see these connections, and probably more, which made it easier for him to call this the Minoan civilization. Now, just like the Harappan civilization I discussed in a previous video, all we have to assess the Minoan civilization is the archaeological evidence. I did mention earlier that writing had been found, which scholars call Linear A, but it hasn't been deciphered yet. So the dominant evidence that we have to understand these Minoans are their palaces all throughout Crete, with rooms that are connected together in a seemingly random way with those storage rooms underneath. These palaces also had courtyards and throne rooms that were decorated with frescoes that depicted not only bulls, but images of luxury, leisure, and sports. The Minoans also seemed to worship in sanctuaries that were scattered all across the island, on mountaintops, in caves, and in country villas. But scholars are not sure what or how they worshipped, because they have yet to find any sacred texts, and they can't infer any religious meaning from the artwork or artifacts with any degree of certainty. Also, there are no defensive walls around the island, which suggests that the Minoans were either peaceful or they had a defensive power that stemmed from their navy, or thalassocracy, that spread across the islands of the Aegean and Mediterranean seas for a few centuries. Along those lines, scholars believe that the Minoans established a huge network of seaborne international trade with other civilizations of the Near East, Egypt, and the Mediterranean, because Minoan artifacts have been found in those places and artifacts from those places have been found on Crete. So this Minoan culture was centered on Crete, but it seems to have extended to islands beyond it. And as these kings or queens of Crete amassed a huge surplus of goods through this international trade and sea power, they filled up their storage rooms underneath their palaces and maintained order and prosperity on the island by dispersing these goods to the population through a redistribution economy. And even though the Minoans appear to have had this Mediterranean good life of leisure, sports, and seafaring, they also seem to have been susceptible to earthquakes. Scholars wonder if this is the reason why these palaces are stitched together with seemingly random rooms, possibly rebuilt areas after these intense earthquakes. Volcanic activity also disrupted this island culture. Around 1600 BCE, 90 miles away from Crete, one massive eruption hit the island of Thera, which is known today as Santorini. The entire island was actually a volcano, and after it exploded, it changed the shape of the island forever, while at the same time burying and preserving the city of Akrotiri. As a result, archaeologists have found the city preserved, much like Pompeii was after the explosion of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, and they discovered that the Minoan civilization actually extended to this island as well. And a fun side note, just like how scholars believe that Homer's Iliad and Odyssey might contain some nuggets of historical truth, they wonder if Plato's account of the lost city of Atlantis might have been this community on Thera. This is only speculation, of course, but some scholars, after considering all the theories about Atlantis, see this theory as the most plausible. Scholars used to believe that this devastating eruption caused the collapse of the Minoans. They believed that the tidal waves, earthquakes, and ash that followed the eruption destroyed buildings and farms on Crete and severely disrupted trade amongst the surrounding islands. This disaster was believed to have disrupted the Minoan economy so much that it could not recover. But today they have since realized that Thera's eruption happened a couple centuries earlier than the Minoans' actual collapse. So scholars still believe that the eruption was a massive blow to their society, but not the final cause of its collapse. These days, as I've already mentioned a few times, scholars believe the Mycenaeans, the homeland of Theseus, displaced the Minoans somehow, sometime between 14 and 1350 BCE, and replaced it with their own culture without attempting to preserve what came before it. Whether it was a violent takeover or a slow assimilation or something else, scholars are unsure. What we do know, however, is that the Mycenaeans were Greek, they were more warlike, and they were centered on the mainland, and we'll discuss them more in a future video. So that's it, our 10th date. 23rd century BCE, the Minoan Greek civilization is founded. Only 43 dates to go. In our next video, we'll see an old kingdom come to an end. If you have any questions or know a lot already, in the comment section, please post anything you think is essential to understanding this century or this topic. If you're adding new information, please cite your sources. I'll be monitoring what's going on, and in my conclusion videos for this project, I'll highlight how we've expanded its historiography and list any questions that seem to be left unanswered. At that point, we'll have a stronger foundation for my next project and all future projects. And of course, if you're an expert and you want to share your knowledge to help guide us, please feel free to join the conversation. Or if you're interested, I'd love to interview you and post it right here. So contact me. If you just found me for the first time and are curious what this is all about, go check out my intro videos to both this project and this channel. And as always, subscribe, like, donate some money to keep this show going, click the notification so you know when the next video is up, and I'll see you then.